This grave wall collapsed as the grave was being dug. Some vault companies, and ours as well, in some instances, will do what's called a false setup when the grave isn't safe. But situations like this is where a Logan vault handler comes in handy, and having a bunch of extra long boards and extra platform boards also makes a huge difference. To start off the platform, I use 2x10s to disperse the weight out away from the grave walls. On top of that, we use our 4x4s for support, and I set those way towards the side that's caved in. That way all that area is covered up by a platform. I start the back of the platform with only one aluminum board rather than my typical 3 that I used to walk on. It'll make the process harder when it comes to putting the casket on the device for myself, but I'd rather this setup be safe. When using a vault buggy, an end shot is always the easiest route to go, but with a large headstone in the way and a fresh grave on the opposite side, I had to do a side shot. This means that once the vault is lifted into the air, I will check the arrows on the top of our protective cover and spin the vault to place it down on the platform. Although since this is a Logan vault handler from Axis Corporation, I could have done an end shot over the headstone. It has 2 hydraulic lifts towards the center, and the front wheel is hydraulic as well, and I could have raised this entire vault buggy a few feet up into the air to where the vault would have cleared over the headstone. But if something were to malfunction, or my vault cables or my vault cover would have come loose and the vault would have dropped at all, I'm not only putting the vault at risk, but the headstone at risk. So today I chose a side shot, just to be safe. The hydraulic levelers really come in handy on hillsides though. To keep this vault steady, leveling out the base of the vault buggy itself is super important as well. But now that I have the vault set down in the general area that I want it, I can use the boom and the supports on the boom to move the vault from side to side to adjust where it sits from end to end on the grave. When doing a side shot, there's one extra step. We need to get the boom supports over the vault. We do this by raising up the boom supports after locking down the boom to make sure that the winch doesn't swing up towards the front of the buggy. We lower the front hydraulic cylinder, and we can crank the supports in the back up over the height of the vault. For the past 8 years or so, I've been a Hilljoy guy, but doing this service today showed me how much better a vault buggy can be used in some situations. If I were using a Hilljoy on this, I would have had to have placed it down next to the grave, spun it, driven it around 15 feet away from the grave, put my long ramps down, and did a side shot, hoping that the weight of the ramps in the vault on the ground wasn't too much for where it's already caved in. So even though I'm used to a Hilljoy, having this vault handler from Axis Corporation the last few days has really showed me the different situations that it can be way better than a Hilljoy. The only thing left to do is get the vault cart ready for transport back to the shop. So I lock everything back down, reattach the winch so it doesn't move around while we're driving, and I put the vault harness back on the buggy. Some vault men will just leave the vault buggy sitting right next to the setup. I prefer to park my truck and the buggy a fair distance away from the setup. This is an industrial piece of equipment, and I don't think it gives the right look to the family when they arrive. I'd rather them just see the truck and the trailer sitting real far away from the setup, and I'll be up there waiting for them when they arrive. Now, it's not the case that every time there's a cave-in such as today that I set up Wilbert way over the vault. Sometimes the cave-in is bad enough to where not any amount of boards will make it safe for the family to be around. One of these days I will do a false setup video to show how that's done, but basically it's setting the vault on the ground and keeping the lid on the vault cart. The casket is then roped into the vault by hand, and the setup is done the same way when it comes to the tent. So the family's still shielded from the elements, we just don't set the vault the Wilbert way. And chances are, we will use the vault cart to lower the vault into the grave once it's been sealed. I prefer not to do it that way. If I can save a setup, I definitely will, because the family saw the pictures of these vaults at the funeral home and they chose what they wanted. And if they saw it set up the Wilbert way, that's the way I believe it should be done. But that being said, safety is everything, and if it's not safe, it's not getting set up. Once we check to make sure the grave walls are still secure,
we can begin the process of swinging the vault ovation style. The first step is to cover our boards with green carpets before placing down the feet. The feet are what suspend the burial vault above the grave. They're reeled 8 times on each end and connected using a one-man bar, so both sides lift at an equal rate. Working around headstones that are close to the end of the grave can complicate this process, but we do everything we can to protect the headstones, like using our glove to make sure we don't scratch the headstone with the foot. Since we used a Logan vault handler to set this vault on 2 aluminum boards, we just need to reel the cables and align them with the slots on the bottom of a Wilbert Tribute. The cross that I built in the bottom of the grave slightly raises the vault ends off of the ground, and the slots in the bottom of the Tribute also help get the cables out from underneath the vault when the vault is lowered. To be perfectly aligned with the grave and with the headstone, one end of the vault needed to be swung around 3 inches. I can use the cables to swing the vault to the right wherever I need it to go. The most important part when swinging a burial vault is adjusting the feet and making sure there's around a knuckle's width away from the vault from the rails. This allows the lid carriers to line up directly over the lid rails, which will be in part 2 of this video. Once we have our spacing around our feet and straightened out the carpets and the boards, we can lift this vault off the 2 aluminum boards and just double check to make sure everything is lined up straight and narrow. Since this vault will be presented ovation style with the lid down towards the family, before we add our lid carriers and lid rails, we'll clean the carpets from where the lid will go. And this is the first step of swinging a Wilbert Tribute. It's now time to separate the lid from the base using our lid carriers and lid rails. The lid carriers clamp onto the lid, and when the vault is lowered, the lid carriers catch the lid rails and the base separates from the lid. With the weather lately, my equipment has been taking a beating in the mud and rain, so as I work today, I wipe down all pieces of stainless steel to try to shine them back up as much as I can. This is why it was so important to scoot the feet back a knuckle's width away from the vault, so that these carriers line up on the lid correctly. If they're too close, they will fall on the other side of the rails, and if they're too far away, they will fall on the inside of the rails. In a perfect world, when the vault is lowered, all 4 wheels on the carriers will line up directly over the rails. When the carriers are put on correctly, they will stay high and tight up against the lid and will not droop towards the middle at all. I place cardboard down to keep my back carpets from getting all muddy when installing the winch, and the winch is attached before we lower the base from the lid. This ensures that if the rails aren't level, the lid won't be able to just start rolling down the lid rails and slam into the ends. If I had to guesstimate, this lid probably weighs around 1,100 pounds, and that's a lot of weight to have rolling down those rails without the winch. We'll lower from one side until the wheels are aligned on the rails, and then we will lock the feet and check the other side to make sure they're aligned as well. And now we lower the base down to where the lowering device pistols will have room to swing freely when lowering the casket. If we lift the base display too high, the pistols would catch on the edge of the base and the casket would wedge and not fit into the vault. And now we push on the lid until the first set of reels goes over the ridge on the rails, and then we can use the winch to slowly lower the lid down to the end of the rails. The opposite process is performed when we seal the vault. We reattach the winch, and we raise the vault lid back over the base, and raise the base back into the lid. The last step of the swinging process is adding the frigid master casket lowering device. Unfortunately, I didn't block up this vault high enough to where the family could go over the headstone with the casket. So the pallbearers will walk the casket to the other side of the setup and place the casket on that first black roller. In a way, it's still safer to come in from the opposite side. If the casket were to be heavy and the pallbearers may be short, I wouldn't want them to damage the casket or damage the headstone when placing the casket onto the lowering device. The pallbearers will set the casket on that first roller. It will slide across the guide bars that I just installed, and then I will lower it down onto these safety bars. And that's where the casket will sit while the service takes place. The very last step of the setup process for a Wilbert Tribute is to add the T-carpets that cover up our reels, our 4x4s, and our wood support boards on the bottom of the setup. And this Wilbert Tribute is set Ovation style and ready to go for when the family arrives. The only thing left to do is set the tent and do my final touch-ups on this setup. And sometimes, no matter how many precautions you take and how much preparation you do, Mother Nature is still going to make her own decision. At some point after the vault was swung, a small area near the northeast corner of the cave wall gave way, and it prevented the vault from sitting level at the base of the grave. So in situations like these, we lift the vault directly out of the grave, level out and dig out the soil that's needed, and place the vault back in its proper position. This task is much easier with the Logan vault handler that can lift the vault out quickly and set it back down quickly. With the Hilljoy, it's an entirely different story, and it takes probably 2 hours longer. In these situations, the family is notified and the funeral director oversees this operation to make sure that the vault is laid to rest in the ground properly. In total, this only took about 8 minutes to do, and it was necessary for the vault to lay level at the bottom of the grave. When using a Hilljoy, I would have had to have maneuvered the Hilljoy back underneath the vault and driven the vault off the platform. Once the grave was dug and leveled, I would have had to have driven it back onto the platform, reset my feet and cables, and swung the vault again, lowering it into the grave, which can definitely cause more issues and more danger for another cave-in. So these Logan vault handlers really come in handy for complications such as this. But it just goes to show you, if you ever want to fight Mother Nature, the best thing you can hope for is a draw. But the vault was taken out, the grave was leveled, and the vault was placed back in its proper position. So no harm was done. We're ready to load up the vault buggy to the back of the truck, head back to the shop, and get ready for the next day's service. God bless, and to all the vault men out there, stay safe.